Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Royal Photographic Society and in a series of awards talks. It's my pleasure to hand over to our awards manager, Joe McDonald, who will introduce our two speakers this evening. And we look forward to what promises to be a wonderful evening. Joe, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for tonight's conversation in partnership with Autograph, a charity whose mission is to enable the public to explore identity, representation, human rights and social justice through work produced by artists who use photography and film. Phoebe's figurative and multidisciplinary practice denotes a commitment of care for how we see each other. Phoebe received the Society's Lumière Award in 2021. Renée is Senior Curator and Head of Curatorial and Collection at Autograph. Renée advocates for a diverse constituency of contemporary artists co-commissioning a range of artistic programmes. Our next conversation will be on the 15th of March between Sylvia Rosset and Renée. All details are available on the website. So over to you, Renée and Phoebe.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joe, for this lovely introduction. And thank you to the RPS, especially Joe and Michael, for hosting us this evening. And of course, my biggest thank you is to Phoebe, the wonderful Phoebe Boswell, for being in conversation with me tonight. It's a pleasure and a privilege always, whether it's in private or in public. So thank you for this. I'm going to do an introduction for maybe about 3 minutes or so. It's a little bit fragmented. It's more words and sentiments rather than an introduction, but that's kind of how this conversation goes, I guess. We've been talking for a few days, and I went into a deep dive the other night, and I feel like I've been immersed in your practice once again for the last 24 hours, and it's been absolutely beautiful. So thank you. I wanted to say one other thing before I forget. Last month, the conversation between Lola Flash and I ended with your name. Some of you in the audience, and today, and also welcome to the audience. Thank you for being here. And when Lola Flash was asked at the end of our conversation about artists whose work she admires, she paused for like a split second, and then she said, Phoebe Boswell. And it wasn't because our talk is coming up. It's because I know how much she adores your work, and I felt it very palpably in that moment. So, yes,
I love that, and it's very reciprocated. So I love that kind of sense of exchange, and the fact that you are the connector between us. So thank you for introducing me to her work.
Thank you. And her exhibition followed yours at Autograph in a way as well. I think that's, and I didn't even think of that connection either. So that's wonderful. But there are so many of us out there who have been nourished by your work as a kind of tonic in a palm. So thank you for this. So I'd like to congratulate you on the RPS Award, the Lumière Award to begin with. It is, of course, very, very well reserved, a beautiful recognition for your wonderful major achievements, your brilliant and crucial interventions, provocations, illuminations, contributions, and offerings, all of those gifts that you have given us and keep on giving over the years in matters of moving image, specifically in relation to the awards, cinematography, video, animation, but of course, the drawing and the installations and the immersive moments that you have gifted us over the years. And I was scrolling through the awardee list very briefly the other night, and I realized that I think out of the 20 plus people who've been given this award since 1999, I think you are only one or maybe two women in that constituency, and probably the only person of color, if I'm not mistaken, which is interesting and something also to reflect on. But of course, this recognition is only one of many. You've been awarded the Future Generation Art Prize, the Special Prize in 2017, the Paul Hamlyn Foundation Award in 2020. You've been an artist in residence at Somerset House, a Ford Foundation Fellow, a Bridget Riley Drawing Fellow at the British School of Rome, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Your work's been exhibited all over the world. It's included in major private as well as public institutions, the Studio Museum in Harlem being one of them, in New York, the Government Art Collection, the BFI, where else? I'm sure there's many others. You've shown it at contemporary biennials, from Gothenburg to the Moving Image Biennial. You've been part of Cinema Afrique, Sundance Festival, and many others. So biography-wise, we could do this for a long time. But what I really want to say briefly is that the way that your work centers this sense, there's a figurative element to your practice, of course. There's that sense of embodiment, most importantly. There are not bodies, but there is this sense of embodiment, and the way that you include the audience, the participants, and all of us in the experience of your art, the way it is deeply personal, deeply political, the way that you open up these raw emotional spaces for us all to kind of immerse ourselves in. I think in your own words at one point you said something along the lines of how we grieve, how we love, how we rest, how we heal, how we protest, how we remember the past in order to imagine the future. And that sentiment runs through all of the work of yours that I've seen. You've also spoken about the way your practice is anchored within a transient, restless, porous state of diasporic consciousness, and that sense of diasporic consciousness. Also that sense of porousness, of transience, that sense of consciousness being embodied, being channeled, is something that will come out in the talk, as I imagine. But these manifestations are always embodied, beautifully layered. There are experiences that come from your own lived experience and then fuse with ours in that way. You center and elevate and amplify and visualize these voices in your figurative, multidisciplinary, in your time-based practice. And the way you, I guess, mobilize these meditations, this sense of consciousness is always as a strategy of resistance, but also as shared language, as embodied methodology, as intimate visual vernaculars. And last thing to say on that, for me, one of the things that I'm always particularly nourished by is how it is so deeply rooted within Black feminist thought. Always this sense of reimagining, this sense of doing and undoing, this kind of wondrous nurturing space that is this radical imaginary of multiple potent Black feminisms, both vulnerable and empowering, personal and collective, cathartic and affirmative, and always fueled by this sense of intimacy and a sense of solidarity and generosity, collective, and making things possible together as a kind of collective mode of being and thinking with, reflecting with, reading with, making with. This sense of, like, I guess Clisson writes about it as a knowing ourselves as part of a crowd in those kinds of formations of we, formations of kinship. And yeah, so an invitation. I see your work always as an invitation that is very generous and deeply committed in this praxis of care. Yeah, practice of care, I guess, and world making, thinking, feeling, being, what our dear friend Christina Sharp calls wake work. And again, we'll get back to that. So yeah, so thank you for those remedial projects and these remedial experiences and the nourishing in all of that. Yeah, I'm grateful. Okay, sorry, that went on.
I'm overwhelmed. I'm very overwhelmed, Renée. I wasn't expecting that.
It's really just a way of saying thank you for everything that you do and everything that you give us and for who you are.
Thank you. I mean, it's already enough to make the work and to be present in the making of the work, but like to hear it through you is a real honor, and to work with you is a real honor. And I think that it's a testament to like these years of us knowing each other that, you know, I think, I don't know, I'm quite speechless. I really wasn't expecting that introduction. But thank you. And also thank you to the Royal Photographic Society for this award, which was also mind-blowing to me. So I'm just very grateful being here and yeah, to be in conversation with you, because we've never in public before chatted. So
No, we
I'm
haven't.
very, very happy to be here.
Oh, very happy to be here with you, and also to be in this kind of, and I'm referring to the image on screen right now, the manifestation of your grandmother's colonial living room, in a sense, which is where I first encountered your work. Almost, it feels like a decade ago, but it was 2014, an installation in the downstairs part of the Carol Fletcher Gallery, which doesn't exist anymore. And it really kind of propelled one instantly into that immersive visual space that you create. And I think it was in many ways, correct me if I'm wrong, please, the kind of beginning of a visual vernacular that you were starting to develop at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I wanted to begin here because I think that this really it was very seminal for me. It really did shape how firstly, it gave me a sense of freedom to how we could speak. It was a very difficult project to make, a very emotionally and physically difficult project to make, but on the level of the human, it's called Matter of Memory, and basically I was taking I wanted to find a way to go home to Kenya. Kenya technically is home, I suppose. I was born there, my parents are from there, but we moved when I was 2 to the Middle East and then to England, and as such I've never felt Kenya in a very lived experience way, and I was having this moment where I was just really struggling with where home is, what home is, how do I define home? And I wanted to find a way to go home, but in a way that wasn't fraudulent. Like, I didn't want to just suddenly claim Kenya because I didn't feel like I owned it. But what I did think that I had was the memories of my parents, who did have a lived experience of home, albeit very opposite in the sense that my mother was Kikuyu, my father's 4th generation British Kenyan. So they had a very different social experience of what living in Kenya was. So this piece started out as conversations that I had with both my parents separately, and from those conversations they told me all about their memories. And at the beginning I kind of thought that it would be this very linear thing, it would be very polar. There would be my mother's story on one side, my father's story on the other side, and somehow in the middle I'd find myself. And that was kind of how I proposed it as an idea. And I thought it would be 2 animations, and yeah, like there would be this metaphorical middle space which would define me and my personhood. But obviously, as soon as we started talking, I realized how quickly how entangled human beings are, and how complicated we are, and how relationships, you know, they complicate everything and merge everything. And so there was no way there would be a kind of linear path through any of the stuff that I was learning from them. So I ended up just taking these very tiny moments from each of their stories. And by then I'd kind of built up this toolbox of methodologies. I've built up this materiality of drawing, of animation, of sound, of projection, I was really interested in clay at the time, photography and props. And I just started to take their stories and to manifest them somehow physically through this variety of different forms. And I wasn't sure at the time what it was going to be. It became a difficult project because it was hard for my parents to relive those memories. And I think in some ways they felt that I was opening up things that didn't need to be opened up. And I was making them in formal ways that perhaps didn't sit comfortably with them. Like, for example, animation could be seen as cartoons, and so to put a very harrowing memory into the form of what would seem to be a cartoon, these types of things were were really jarring, and it made me understand the importance of how we speak visually, and how we have to care for each other visually in the making. So in the end, I had all of this stuff and I didn't know where to place it, and I decided that the only thing that the most potent place for me when thinking about Kenya was my grandmother's living room. And so I ended up making this recreation of the living room, and everything in it, I wanted there to be the sense of domesticity, but that everything in it is imbued with both the complicatedness of a family life, of the love of a family life, but also the legacy of the history, the brutality of colonialism on Kenya, and how that it exists within our living space. So in the two central chairs are both of my parents' voices. They exist in the wings of the chairs. One my mother's, one my father's, and my voice layers over the top. And then and they tell their memories, and as they tell them, you notice the little bits of stories playing out in the around the room. So this is a projection of a little girl swimming. She's simultaneously swimming and drowning in milk. It was from a story my mother told about the only time she remembers as a kid feeling kind of satiated. Her grandfather had a job in a British landowner's cattle farm, and so they always had milk to drink, but it would curdle, it would, so on the one hand there's this reverie of swimming within the milk, but on the other hand you're sort of choking in it and drowning in it. So so it's a projection that projects onto real milk, that projections onto, I'm aware we have a lot to get through, so I'm not going to go through every story, but this is a projection onto a teapot that was hand drawn. Every iteration of it, I draw a dying elephant, which is a testimony to a story that my dad told me about going and killing an elephant with his own father, hunting an elephant with his own father. At the time, this is what they did when he was a child, and he bears a lot of guilt for the you know, for who he was and who he was born into and what he was born into as a British person in Kenya before independence. So in every iteration of the show, I draw this dying elephant, but it's also obviously like the elephant in the room that exists within our living space. On top of the elephant is, I project an animation of flies feasting on a wound. I was really interested in the difference between animation and drawing, and how living and dying and death and breathing, and so animation and projection became this way to kind of play with ideas of consciousness and death and mortality and these things. The wall. Sorry.
I was just going to say that there is, as is with most of your work or all of your work, that sense that what you're communicating, all of those different narratives and memories and stories and histories and you know, generational traumas, that they can't be contained within one single frame, within one single region. And that's where the immersive experience comes in, and that's where in this particular installation you start to bring them all together because of that sense of bursting.
This is exactly it. Like there's too much, like the nuance is so huge, and the necessity to honor every aspect of it, the good and the bad, and to acknowledge every aspect of our personhoods in order to be able to, you know, I always think that you have to look backwards in order to move forwards. And so, for example, these are drawings from family photographs, but this, for example, is my two sets of grandparents sitting together meeting, but obviously it's a drawing, and because it's a thing that never happened. So it's taken from two different photographs, and by drawing from these photographs, it creates a new memory that is an imagined memory that is righting the wrong of the fact that, you know, what would have happened if they had just come together and talked. Like, it would have been a very different history, and the future would have been different. So there's a kind of hauntology to
and that also relates back to that thing I was trying to say at the end of my introduction, that imagining of an otherwise, and a space where things would have come together differently, and imagining that those different possible futures as well as, you know, possible pasts that feed into that.
And everything is on a loop. So this was the beginning of my kind of preoccupation with looping. I'm obsessed with looping. I never want someone to walk in and feel the beginning or the end of something. I always want you to walk in where you are and to meet the work where it is. And so I use loops so that there's always a constant. You'll never go in and have the same experience twice. So everything loops at it. It connects serendipitously. So I'm just going to play you this very short thing so you can see the animation. The beginning of it is the central projection, which is a 30-minute hand-drawn animation of a landscape. It starts off with the tea plantation outside my grandmother's living room, at the view from her house, and then it morphs into various different things, and vaguely it tells the story through land of Kenya's colonial past. So so that's the beginning, and it's sped up by 800%, so it's a lot faster than it should be. It's a very slow, meandering thing, so when you're standing in it, you don't really notice that it's moving or changing until it changes. And then some of the things that I talked about will be in the after that. So yeah, so that work like very much set me off on a firstly, it gave me the confidence to feel like I could tell the stories that I wanted to tell, and that there was space, or that I could create space that made sense to me, and that was generous and generative of like a non-categorized way of thinking about who we are and what, how and why we exist in the world. And yeah, I'm very grateful for that work. Even when I think of what I'm doing now, like it always kind of, I don't know, I always think back to that work, because also it was so super important for me personally as well to like figure out my own sense of place, I think.
And there's so many elements in that work that also reappear in different ways and in different manifestations in other works. It really feels like there's all of these seeds that sort of poured and permeated into these other pieces that you've created since. And one of the things that I love the way that the voices of your parents and your own voice are literally embedded within the fabric of the chairs that one is sitting in, and that again, there's a sense of embodiment and a sense of appearance within that. And then in this piece here in Mutimia, which you created, I think, a couple of years after A Matter of Memory. So we're now in 2016, and you were inspired by Audre Lorde's The Transformation of Silence into Language and Action, her seminal piece, and that sense that again will reappear in many different instances later, of channeling voices and using bodies as vessels for embodiment and activating and elevating and amplifying voices as part of the your multi-layered practice. Again, I think really crystallized with this body of work. Would you talk a little bit about that and that sense of the body as a vessel for change and the notion of protest, of course?
Yeah, so this piece is called Mutimia. Mutimia in Kikuyu, which is my mother tongue, means woman, but some say it translates more directly as the one whose lips are sealed. I was sent this image by a friend of mine of these women, these elders lying naked in a dirt path, and she didn't send me the story she just sent the image to begin with, and my initial response was, oh my God, what is being done to these women? Like, who is brutalizing them and how are they being brutalized? And then I read about it, and they were the Acholi women in Apa in Uganda, and the community had been fighting land right issues for a long time. And on this day, the multinational, the corporations or whatever, had sent in police and the army to physically remove the people off the land. And the women were like, okay, enough is enough. Our men have tried to speak to these people. In many African cultures, men seeing their mothers naked is a taboo. It kind of is a curse, because once a man sees their mother naked, they're reminded that there's no one more powerful than a mother. So when an elder woman lays naked, men kind of, lose their power. So these women decided, enough is enough, let's take off our clothes and we'll lie in this path. And the men freaked out, the police freaked out, they ran away, and it changed history that day. And so my understanding of it, because of my conditioning of understanding what a woman's body is in a public space, I had the complete wrong idea. It was a very heroic image, actually. And then I started researching all of these moments in history where women have done this, have put their bodies on the line. But these moments are not always written about in history books, because history books tend to be written by men. So there are these private moments in public that all the women get shamed for it. And so I wanted to create this work where I saluted women who put their bodies on the line. I was also thinking a lot about the female nude in art history, and how it's always seen, it's historically seen through the gaze of a man. It's seen as passive or eroticized or exoticized or silenced in some way. So I wanted to create this army. I wanted them to exist on all of the walls, to insist themselves on all of the walls of the gallery. So I put out a call for women to join my army, and these amazing women came through to the studio individually, and we together went on this kind of exploration through their bodies of what protest is, what it looks like and what it feels like in the body. And through that, I ended up making this 30-minute looped animation, which goes through all of these various emotional states of protest, determined by my conversations with these women and everything, all the wisdom that they brought to the work. Sorry. So it ends up being this hand-drawn animation, but then also because the stories that were coming through to me and the way I was talking about this project with these women, it was really important that their voices were there, and also that voice and sound became a huge part of it, especially in the gallery, which is, you know, notoriously like it's a silent place, it's a revered silent space. So so I wanted to disrupt that. So in the floor of the gallery is a series of sensors, and each sensor is linked to a soundtrack. So I worked with a gospel choir, I worked with women reading from their Kenyan women reading from their texts. I asked a lot of women to respond to provocations from Audre Lorde's Transformation of Silence. And so it becomes this thing. So I'm just going to play you, I'll just play you excerpts from the diagram of it. So here we go.
To demand the release of nationalist there is no strong curse or the Kenyan post-colonial contract is not an arrangement between allegedly neutral imperialism, but rather a patriarchal and ethnicist order based on the domination of all Kenyan women by all Kenyan men. Fitting rhythms to the the political significance of Royal Photography, the powerful matriarch who once briefly ruled the Gipsy. We are told that one was brought here because the men plotted to impregnate. This carefully circulated and re-narrated re-inscribes alleged contradiction. Created invisible and vocal by the focus on performance and non-performance.
So when the, it's an awkward thing to stop on, but when the gallery is empty, when there's no one there, it's silent. But when you walk in and you acknowledge, you stand amongst these women and you acknowledge their presence, you activate through these pressure sensors that are hidden in the floor, you activate the sound. So if you're the only person in the room, there'll be a small amount of sound. But if the room is full of people acknowledging the presence of these women, then there's this very large crescendo of sound. And it was important to me that that I drew these women, because I think it was as you say about embodiment, like we filmed everything, but it was this kind of sitting with it and doing this very long, very arduous hand-drawn animation, which is 25 frames per second. So it was being committed to these women's bodies and learning their bodies and learning their kind of mannerisms through drawing, that I think, yeah, like for me, that's where the work is. And then what happens after that is like what's given to the gallery space after that is like the, you know, the thing at the end of the wine.
What's so wonderful is also the way you create that sort of like sense of kinship. So you create that sense of family, this family of women, a sense of agency and kinship, which you give both, of course, to the participants, the women with whom you collaborate, but also to the audience in a sense, by enabling us and empowering us to acknowledge their presence, but also to make our own presence felt in the room. So we become activists as soon as we enter the gallery. So you are an activist, the women in the project are an activist, as are the audiences. So there's that incredibly generous mode where you think and include everyone and all of us in this conversation and invitation.
I hope so. I hope so. I'll just fly through this, I think. So
We
this
have half an hour, even then we're pushing it. So, and we're only on our second project.
I know, so we should
I have to help each other.
So let me just move forward.
Maybe, I mean, one thing there, we could stop there briefly, because with this is the installation in Kiev, if I understand this correctly. And in Kiev, you did another additional gesture of giving agency to the audience in terms of, maybe you talk about it rather than me trying to.
You do a really good job. So here I wanted to give the same agency that I had as the artist, which was black pigment on a white ground, as in pencil and paper. So we created this very white space, and I wrote the provocations that I'd asked the women, and then I placed charcoal around the room. And it was meant to be a kind of a tease in a way to the audience, like, what would you do if you mark the space? Like, can you protest as well here? The other thing about it was that it was the sense that like every mark made, firstly by me, but then extending out into the gallery space is an act of protest, because it's acknowledging this requirement for protest. So the reason why the floor is white is so that even your footprints, the fact that you've been present there, become a kind of drawing in a way. But so I placed this, and but the gallery invigilators were told to say, you know, this is still an artwork, be mindful of that. And in Kiev, it became very quickly this very, you know, it ended up looking like this, and it changed the work completely, because suddenly these women are now in this very chaotic space, and there was a lot of beautiful things written, but there was a lot of nonsense and like also kind of offensive things as well. The only thing I insisted was that if any of the walls where the women were drawn on at all, that would be removed, but for the respect of the women. But other than that, anything was allowed. And for me as the artist, it was like this very, also it was in Kiev, so I was watching it happen on Instagram, and I was like, on the one hand, this is my baby, but on the other, like, I was really fascinated by by the response and how the audience did it. And we then did it in Venice, and obviously in a palazzo it's different. I didn't, and because it ended up winning this prize, and that's why it went to Venice, and I didn't want it no longer had a kind of subversive effect. So I didn't want to kind of have a kind of contrived idea of a subversive thing. So I took that away, and instead we put a self-recording microphone in another space where you could go in and record yourself, and that would be fed into the floor. So you were still activating the space with your voice. Yeah.
Amazing. So that sense of solidarity and action-based work, almost from that moment on, from Mutimia, really infiltrated all of your other projects, I would say, in a sense. And I think there is maybe when we speak about this next project, that sense of birthing, of one project birthing the next, is really beautiful. So there's a trace that then reappears elsewhere, and there's that lineage that runs both from one project to the next within those projects, but also there's that lineage of Black female literary and artistic activism, which you also channel again and again. And Audre Lorde, of course, appears many times. We'll see that Christina Sharp reappears in the recent work, and here we are looking at Adrian Piper in 1971. Her wonderful Food for the Spirit series, which birthed, what is it, for every real word spoken.
So yeah, I was fascinated by Adrian Piper's Food for the Spirit, and this idea that you can, she sequestered herself in a loft for I think 2 months, and in order to not lose herself, like I'm paraphrasing terribly here, but in order to not lose herself, every day she would take these self-authored photographs, and so I was, from Mutimia, I was thinking, like, what does it mean to stand in your own nudity and to take ownership of your own body in this like, what happens to the gaze when you do that? So I invited women to think about this pose, and to stand in with their phone cameras and take this picture, and then I drew these very large scale, they're almost life-size drawings, again changing them from a photograph into a drawing, but using photography in that way was a way of, like, embodying the photograph through my hand. And then in every phone there's a hand-drawn QR code, and each woman has complete ownership of that code, and they can program it to whatever they want you to read or hear or watch while you're looking at them. So it was this kind of way of trying to give them as much agency as possible. They also named their own drawings, and for the life of the work, they now can change it whenever they want. So they're sitting in, like, even if this drawing is in storage or whatever, or if it's on somewhere in a collection somewhere, this woman can still speak, and can speak without me having to be any kind of go-between.
So there's that wonderful sense of, I mean, that's even another implication of giving agency in that sense, but also undermining the very concept and the very currency of this silent muse of art history. Women's bodies and women have been kind of subjected to and framed as. I also wanted to just briefly say the other thing within the project is your notion of woman is, of course, inclusive, in that sense that trans women appear in that project, non-binary, queer, cis women. So that wonderful kind of like inclusivity within that family of allies that you create is also always remarkable. Yeah, that kind of networked community. And I wanted to say this earlier. One of the things that I'm always so so amazed and struck by is the intricate way of how you draw and the labor intensivity that you give to each of those projects, that incredible sense of craftswomanship, that is a word, right?
Craftswomanship.
Yeah, but it is now.
Love it.
But how you then connected with these, very innovative and immersive new technologies. So you bring together, I mean, for so many of us, having one of those skills would be more than enough, but you bring all of them together every time and time again and amplify it with each project, which we'll see if we ever get to the end of our...
We're getting there. We're moving.
Yeah, we're moving. And also you create very, very personal and intimate relationships with each of your participants in those projects, as I understand. So the next series that we can maybe very briefly touch upon, entitled "I Need to Believe That the World is Still Beautiful" from 2008, centers one particular individual figure. Would you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so this is made actually from outtakes from the footage that I made Multimedia with, and this is Bui Tamello, incredible writer based in London, who came forward to do Multimedia. I didn't know her at the time, and she came to the studio, and she was so, I don't want to talk much about her when she's not present in the room, but basically we ended up continuing our conversation in a really meaningful way after the initial meeting, and it was really poignant how affected she had been by standing and doing this project with me, and so this work is kind of just I just wanted to honor her and her vulnerability and her strength, and just the fact that she kind of gave herself so wholly to and openly to this work. So it's a 3-channel video installation. Each channel is obviously looped. They're all different lengths. So again, the body becomes exactly what it wants to be, serendipitously. It changes all the time. And then there's always a black painted wall, and on the wall, I asked Bui to tell me what she wants to say in that exact moment, whenever the show is, wherever the show is. And so then that gets written in black on black onto the wall as this kind of ongoing, it kind of becomes a bit journalistic for her, but I think. So this is what one of the last iterations, it was at Somerset House, and this is what she wanted to say then, but it depends, like if it would depend geographically or and what's going on in her life or in the world, how she chooses to speak each time. But there's a kind of, I just wanted to honor her, and it's a piece that I love a lot, because it teaches me every time, like this giving that she also generously gives to the work every time.
It's wonderful, that sense of exchange. I mean, what you just said is very beautiful, in the sense that you learn from the piece each time that you collaborate together. So there's a really beautiful sense of exchange and co-creation, if you will. That's very powerful in your work. I'm very, very aware of time, so do forgive.
I know, I think we should move through.
So we'll have to go a little bit quick. But so you and I collaborated on an exhibition in 2019. I think we started talking around 2017, 2018. This was a very traumatic and profound and difficult period in your life. And I'm also very grateful that you allowed me into that conversation at that time, and how openly you you shared what you were going through. It was a time where your spiritual, your physical, and your emotional health were going through a set of interconnected traumas, if you will, and where art making became a way of processing and navigating a space of grief, but you then also of grief and loss and pain, and you very generously created and shared this experience and made this sort of like collective healing space, I think, for both yourself, but also for us, by allowing us into this conversation. And you've moved on quickly from the She Summons an Army, which is, but I fell in love with that body of work at the time also, because it was so poignant, the way that you summoned this army of women with the monocular head.
Mm-hmm.
Is that the right way? Yes. And we also simulated a kind of helmet, but maybe you talk about it, but what for me, it was just one of those incredible bodies of work that showed that sense of strength, and you've always given so freely to everyone else that space of agency, and here is a moment where you kind of create this army to buoy and hold and embrace you, and you, it's easy to just
no, I mean, so it was, as you said, it was like a very traumatic time. I lost the sight in my right eye, and my heart ruptured, and so it was a time where I kind of lost hope a bit, and I wasn't sure if I was going to make any more. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I wasn't sure if I had the strength to do anything. And very, very gradually, I started going back to the studio in these very, very small pockets of time. And it was at that time that we'd scheduled, I think, that we were going to start talking about this potential show. And I think you came to the studio and it was just bleak, like it was so bleak. And it was only because you were so kind and you saw something in this stuff that I was making, which was very much, art making changed for me at that moment. Like it became something that I just needed to do in order to, keep breathing. Like it really became a safety valve and like a ritual kind of thing. And these drawings, they started off just as kind of doodles. I would do them in the waiting rooms in the hospitals that I was at, and then I realized like I was creating this army for myself, for my imagination, and it was obviously invoking all of these kind of past works where I'd also gained so much strength from making these works about these incredible women who participated. And so it was like this way of just doing that in my kind of intimate space. And I also was doing a lot of self-portraits from my phone, like trying to kind of recognize myself again after this like thing that changed not only how I look, but also how I see the world. So drawing again was this way of trying to navigate the deep wilderness that I was in, but through that whole thing, we were having these conversations, and they manifested in this show that we did.
But there was so much courage there, Phoebe. I remember just seeing that incredible strength and that courage that you had in these unbelievably potent, powerful pieces that you were creating. And I remember you saying that they're just sort of drawings that you're making at this, but you were literally creating this army of figures with this sight that you were, that loss sort of like almost like re-giving it to yourself through these figures that you were drawing. I mean, I thought it was just the most incredible manifestation of courage and strength and vulnerability.
Honestly, like I have to give you, so because it was the alchemy of I think a shared sense of like the support structure of Black feminism or something. There was something in the alchemy of our meeting that changed it from being a very unhappy thing to being something that was potentially empowered. And over time, like, it became, even in my kind of depressed understanding, it became like a driver, and also I remember saying to you, like, is this just really self-absorbed? I was like, am I just being super self-absorbed? But we ended up making this show and being given space in Autograph to make this show exactly as I needed it to be. I think
it to be, exactly. But it was this sense of, it felt like we were part of a journey of recovery and a journey of renewal, you know, and it was that sense of imagining the possible future that was emerging and that was to come. It felt like it was the coming and the process was happening. And I think that's one of the things that made that show and your work so powerful at the time, how deeply personal it was, but also how it was vulnerable and empowering, but it was cathartic and affirmative. And you were making this very clear stance where you're saying, actually, this is an act of defiance. It's an acceptance and an acknowledgement of where I am and what my body, my heart, my mind, my soul is going through. But it was also an act of defiance that said, I'm here, I am present, I exist. You know, it was a kind of, I think we talked about the poetics of endurance.
Mm-hmm. And also grief, like as a cultural thing, like, I realized that I didn't know how to grieve. Like, I didn't have the tools, and collectively we didn't have the tools to grieve this thing that was happening. And so art making became a kind of channel for grief. And so this work, I went home, I went to Zanzibar to kind of recuperate. And whenever you have a trauma, like, it extends out of yourself. And so my family struggled as well with this thing that had happened. And my dad had a very hard time verbalizing that. But he was, like, I wanted to be able to talk to him about it, but we didn't have the language. And so I bought him a drone and I asked him if he could just be part of this thing, if he could help me with this project. I wanted to place myself in the space between the land and the sea. That space in Old English is called Ithlaf. I wanted that this thing that had happened to me, which I think is so huge, and I wanted to realize its kind of insignificance when you're kind of faced with a kind of colossal potential of nature, and also the unforgivingness, the relentlessness of the ocean, and but also the incubator that the ocean is, the way it holds you even when you don't want to hold yourself or you can't hold yourself. So every day we would go out with this really crap drone. Like, it didn't last for more than 26 minutes, I think. But every day we'd go out, and it was this way of us being present together, and we both knew why we were there, but we didn't have to use a language that wasn't holding our grief. Like, the language that we were accustomed to speaking in just didn't mean anything at that time. So this just became a way for us to do that, and it became this episodic work.
Do you mind if we talk a little bit whilst it's
Yeah, of course. Can you hear it, or should I turn off the breath?
No, maybe just if you say, let's let it play, but let's speak a little bit. The breath, the soundtrack to it in a sense. So it's that breathing, the rhythm of breathing.
Mm-hmm.
But
I can't actually turn it off because this
don't
thing.
worry, we'll keep it. It's fine. But just, I'm only doing this in the interest of time.
No, of course.
We don't have much time left, but I wanted to. So this piece was only one of 6 or 7 works that you produced. I mean, you were incredibly creatively proficient and active during that time. I don't know how you managed to produce all of these bodies of work as part of this healing process, but somehow you did. So, and this was installed downstairs as a series of installations, which again also gave agency to the audience, because there was a soundscape that went with it. So as one stepped onto the pads, your voice started to again become this cacophony of different sounds. Would you talk a little bit about the writing that went with that?
Yeah, so when I was in the heart hospital, there was a woman next to me in bed, and she was very delirious and she was very ill, and she kept saying repeatedly, "Take me to the lighthouse, take me to the lighthouse." And no one really understood what, like her family didn't know what she meant. But I was sitting there, I was lying in my bed, and I was like, what is this lighthouse? Where is my lighthouse? And that became the kind of driving force of all of this work, that like, maybe I can find some kind of lighthouse, like maybe this will be the lighthouse. And I kept being told to write and to journal, and I was like, I don't have anything to say. Like it was, and so I eventually started to just every day start with "Take me to the lighthouse," and then whatever happened after that happened. And so in these pressure senses, much like Mutamia, there's this whole long kind of, I guess it's like a spoken word piece that plays, and then Iflaf is played in a kind of rolling multiple way from these box plinths. So you look down at it on the ground.
And then, so can we talk 1 minute about this before we talk about the giant drawing across the gallery, in that sense of inscribing yourself into the actual space? So I'd like you to just talk a little bit about how you mobilize medical imagery as part of that, and how that relates to your practice.
Yeah, so the top middle image is a surgery I had on my eye. My surgeon is amazing. He's like a rock star, and he loved the fact, I think, that he was helping an artist save their eye. And so he agreed to let me film. So we filmed the surgery. And the bottom one is the angiogram I had on my heart, and you can see where the artery is ruptured. And both of these things, like when I saw them, they reminded me so much of like the bottom one is not doctored at all. And it looks to me like a charcoal drawing. It looks like something I could have drawn. And the top one of my eye, I remember we watched it for the first time together, the color version, and it was like a lot. So I made it into black and white, and the blood starts to look like ink, and so I was interested in the ways that these medical images were kind of they were seeping into a kind of definable drawing practice, and they could be kind of seen in unity with this drawing practice. And there was something about that enabled me to kind of, like, art is an illusion that we all believe because we're humans and we want to believe. And so even this, like the science of the medical things that were taking place within my body also becomes kind of an illusionary thing. And so
it's also contemplating that sense of the kind of optical mechanics of the eye as lens.
As
right?
the lens of the camera, exactly.
And it was incredibly immersive as an installation.
Yeah, we created this cocoon on the top floor, and you walked inside it, and you had this very private moment with the heart on the ground, and these three projections. And then we get to the drawing on the line.
Yes, 27 meters of it.
So yeah, so autograph very, very, very generously, thanks to Renée, I'm sure, gave me 21 days prior to the show to just be in the space. And so every day I would photograph myself in the morning, and that would become the drawing or drawings of the day. I created this horizon just with tape, and then we didn't know what it was going to be. It became this very organic kind of tidal thing, because it took whatever moods was happening at the time. So it began with the, and every time I drew, it was like every time I drew myself onto the wall, it was like I was allowing it to then exist there. So it didn't have to exist within me, but it was also like being fully acknowledging of the fragility of me at the time. And it's done in soft willow charcoal, so it's really, really delicate. Like, and I don't think we fixed it, and it was very much, and we didn't place any kind of line, so the audience was had the, you know, they could have destroyed it, and there was something about like regaining trust after this trauma that existed within that kind of idea to not protect the work on the wall, and to give it and trust that the audience was not going to harm me.
And they didn't. It was.
And like, they really didn't.
I mean, the drawing stayed intact for the entire time, I think. And there's something so powerful about inscribing yourself in that extended way, in this extended self-portrait, literally into the fabric of the building, into the skin of the building. And as you say, there was a kind of letting go, I think, that was part of it. And just watching, I mean, I was there with you almost every day, if not every day, I think, just watching you emerge in that space. It felt like each day you were letting go a little bit, and you were kind of coming back.
It became so activated. I was so joyous by the end. Like, I was so elated. The only parts that were not drawn from that day's photographs was this central figure, which was me the day that my eye got smashed. And I wanted that to be there, because once I realized what the drawing was doing for me, like, it was really allowing me to kind of remove this from my guts, I guess, or from my spirit. So I wanted that day to also be there as a way to release it. And then the other part was I had this. I kept, like, while I was drawing, I kept having this memory of this picture of myself as a kid, and I was really thinking about, like, how, you know, I was having these conversations with little baby Phoebe and being like, you didn't deserve this to happen, like, this shouldn't have happened, but we're going to be okay. And so I wanted little baby Phoebe to be there, and I had this thought, this dream vision of this photo, but I wasn't sure if it existed. So I drew on the back of a piece of paper this, and I sent it to my sister Freddie. And I was like, does this picture of me exist? I feel like there's this picture. And she immediately sent me this. And so that became the kind of anchor of the work. And so little baby Phoebe kind of takes watch of the rest of me. She sits like a queen, you know, like
on a potty though.
Huh?
I love that she's actually sitting on a potty.
Sitting on a potty. It's all very real.
But also, Phoebe, again, I'm only doing this really in the interest of time, because we've gone over time, but unless Michael stops us, it's okay. Unless Michael stops us, which I know he can, we'll just do another. Can you go back for 1 second, though? We'll just, I wanted to just, for a moment, if we can talk about photography, just literally 30 seconds, because you've said something very wonderful when you first received this award. I think you were asked about how photography figures within your practice, and you said something like, it's my trusted sidekick, which I think is just, or my collaborator or trusted ally or something. I think you used the word sidekick. Can you maybe say something about photography within the practice as archive, as fuel, as this sort of like foundational thing that appears and reappears, including in this show?
Yeah, I mean, it was when I was given this award that I started really thinking, like, what is photography in my practice? Where does it, and it really exists in every crevice of the making part. And so obviously, like with this, photography becomes the food for the making. With when I draw from people, I usually draw from photographs, because there's like an element of like the trusted sidekick. Like I'll draw from life a little bit, but photography becomes this this way that I can go into the privacy of my space and still be present with you. And I think that the way we exist now, we're so online with social media, so much a kind of parallel part of our lives. Photography plays such a dominant role in how we see ourselves anyway. I'm always interested in like our real self and our virtual self and what that is. And so I see photography as just this other way of seeing the reality of our being, and I allow it to guide me and to be like a constant tool, even though the end is usually not a photograph, a physical photograph.
As such, I wonder if we should.
I think
talk about this most. Okay, so we have a couple of minutes, literally a couple of minutes. I know we won't get to the very end of the images, but maybe just this is your most recent installation. You've come back from New Orleans, where you created, again, drawing directly onto the gallery walls, this incredibly evocative piece called The Black Horizon, Do We Muse on the Sky or Remember the Sea? And if we can maybe, if you can just spend like a couple of minutes on that before we wrap up, that would be beautiful.
So this is at the CAC in New Orleans, and I've been thinking a lot about the body of water as this potential meeting place for diasporic people to come and contemplate freedom. Bodies of water hold legacies of trauma for Black people, but also if you think of the body of water as the place between here and there, you can kind of consider, you can begin to consider notions of non-citizenship, to use a Christina Sharp term, and citizenship comes always with the attendant kind of restrictions of unfreedom. Like citizens aren't always treated in the same way. We understand that from the hierarchy of what modernity has done to and so if the body of water as this place between here and there, but also as the holder for remembering the trauma that has brought us here, perhaps we can start to begin to imagine something beyond that horizon. So physically it's just this a painted black horizon. It's just above 6 foot, so it's above average human height. And over the course of a month, I drew
like Atlantis.
I don't know what to show you first. Yeah, shall I just keep this going?
Yeah. Maybe just
like Atlantis. This I record for you, my comrades. Down, under,
the moving
underwater,
of the freed,
below
expose
great
the
waves,
chasm
far
between the
from
grand
shores,
narrative of
deep down the
emancipation.
bottom of the
okay,
sea.
let's move on from it. But unfortunately,
sorry, we have to go.
Let's do 1 minute to wrap it up, but maybe just if you can say something about the core of the collaborative aspect. So you invited all of these figures to contribute voices and texts and readings to it. We worked with J.D. Allen on the music, but also that notion of freedom. I think it would be nice if you talked about that a little bit before we finish.
So yeah, so I invited 50 Black thinkers, and they ranged from, and they were people who I think and draw with and through. So they ranged from, you know, people like Christina Sharp, Ronaldo Walcott, Saidiya Hartman, but it went on to like a 4-year-old child, lots of, because I didn't want it to be that freedom is only a, you know, an intellectual, rigorous thing. Like, so basically I asked each one to record themselves responding to what is freedom, what does freedom mean to you, and how will you practice freedom today? And that becomes the soundscape. It's in the two of the pillars in the room, and the first time it plays, every voice has complete what's the word? Like every voice is heard separately, but one loop is longer than the other. So the second time it plays, it starts to go out of sync, and then it will go more and more and more out of sync. So these voices start to kind of be merged together, so that you know, contradictions and unity start to play out in the sound. Then J.D. Allen created a sonic version of the Black Horizon, which was just a very pared down double bass playing very rhythmically in the bottom of the spatially in the bottom of the room. And then he responded to the timbre of everyone's voice with his saxophone, and so those passages of his saxophone play from the rafters into the top of the building, and it was I was very interested in jazz and improvisation, and how jazz kind of connotes freedom, and in the collaboration we kind of were learning, like he also had to kind of think about what even though jazz is an improvised thing, what happens when it becomes a spatial,
yes,
and it's not like a,
but also what happens when it becomes a collective experience, I guess. And one of the things with this project, I mean, unfortunately I didn't see it in situ, but just seeing the images and the imagery from it, there are all of these different references that one, like it means something else to people in the sense that you, be it, for example, like if we, the image of the young girl, we talked about this earlier with the striking yellow eyes, is a direct reference to Christina book In the Wake, which we've referenced a few times now, and there's that sense of making. I think Christina writes about a making present that someone that those eyes look out to. I hope I paraphrased that right. So it's that sense of making present and forcing us to encounter and acknowledge this young girl's presence, which is based on a photograph again, but also it's really that wonderful performance of performing wake work and performing the praxis space, and that sense of embodiment that we began this conversation with. And I think it would be, I think it's finding that, it's just finding that language and giving us that wonderful gift of language, visual language and vernacular, that you create this for these collective experiences. And it also reminds me of and maybe that's a good point to finish on, if you agree, what Toni Morrison describes as responsibility. So it's response and responsibility fused, that sense of our responsibility, our ability to respond, to act and do something. And
this is it. Like I always, like, Christina is such a force in my thinking, and it's always, I just always think like, how do we tell our stories but do no more harm? And it's and images of Black representation have, because of it's too much to get into, but the potential for harm is immense when you're dealing with Black subjectivity. And so how do we be truthful to the stories, even to the trauma, even to the grief, even to the violence, even to the need for protest, without perpetrating any more harm? Like, how do we do that? And that's always at the forefront of my mind whenever I'm making. So
Maybe I could do this for so long. Another 2 hours, I'm already in trouble because
I know everyone's gone probably.
was timekeeper tonight, so apologies on that, but more than apologies, thank you so much for your generosity, your insights, and your brilliance, and for so openly sharing all of this. I know there's 2 more bodies of work that we didn't get to.
I think it's a good place to
you know,
stop.
we'll just, yeah, I think we'll stop here, absolutely, and you and I will of course pick this up for another conversation in the near future. And Michael, I know some questions did pop up. Would you like us to take 1 or 2 if we can?
I think we may be a little bit short of time, actually. So, I mean, what I'll do, I'll share the chat with you both, Phoebe and Renée, so you can see, because there's some really generous comments that are coming from some of the audience this evening. I think I'll just quote one that's just come in from Lucy, who really just wants to thank you both, and Phoebe for sharing, it's popping off my screen, sharing your amazing creative power and vulnerability, humbled by your talent. And I think for me that, you know, I think both of you have brought out Phoebe's depth and insights and that craftswomanship, that new term you've coined, Renée, which you know, that comes across so well. And I think for me, my takeaway from this evening is that collaboration that you've had with everyone, whether that's, you know, your subjects, but actually more recently with Renée as a curator collaborating with you. And I think that's come across for me. And yeah, thank you so much for the insights that you've given us into your work this evening. I think just as a reminder for our audience, the Lumière Award is for a major achievement in cinematography, video, or animation. And you know, I think you tick a number of those boxes, and photography obviously underpins all of that. So thank you so much for sharing those insights, Renée, for bringing those forth from Phoebe. And congratulations on your Lumière Award. We're honoured that you've accepted it, and I'm sure there's so much more work that we're going to be seeing over the next future years. So thank you so much for sharing that with us all this evening, and thank you to our audience for staying with us. I don't think it was a hardship, I suspect, for most of our audience. So you know, we're going to have to get you back to talk about those final projects. So thank you both. And on behalf of the RPS, we're so pleased to have you as our Lumière Award recipient.
I'm very grateful. Thank you very, very much. And Renée, I love you.
Just a final thank you for Joe for making this evening happen and bringing everyone together. So thank you, Joe, for doing that at the RPS.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Michael, and everyone.
Right. Good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care.